I'd like to start by thanking the organizers of this open community workshop on advancing Arctic observation and data actions within the UN Decade for Ocean Science Plan for the Arctic. I'll be speaking today to Sustaining Arctic Observing Networks, or SAON, and its roadmap for Arctic observing and data systems, and how SAON as an organization and ROADS as a process can be linked to and lead to, we hope, improved outcomes under the Arctic Action Plan. My name is Sandy Starkweather. I'm a research scientist at the University of Colorado, and I'm fully funded by our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to lead our national coordination efforts on the Arctic Observing Network under a construct known as US AON, which serves as our national committee to SAON. So I'll be speaking from that perspective, and also I served as the lead author on SAON's roadmap for Arctic observing and data systems, and so I'll be speaking from that perspective today as well. So I'll start with a few words about SAON to set the context. SAON was created as a joint initiative of the Arctic Council and the International Arctic Science Committee, IASC, about 10 years ago. And it was created in the recognition that the complexity of what we're trying to achieve with an Arctic observing network, crossing many spheres from atmosphere, ocean science, terrestrial science, cryospheric, biological systems, physical systems, and more, that there were many centers of action that needed to be drawn together under AON, but there were also many countries that needed to be drawn together, both Arctic and non-Arctic actors, non-national actors, academics, indigenous peoples organizations, and communities, and other key organizations. And what was really needed was for these groups to come together into a network of systematic facilitation and planning approaches. So I'll use this term polycentricism a couple times in this talk, and I'll spend a moment talking about what it means right now. So SAON is what we would call a polycentric actor, meaning that it's trying to unite many diverse centers of action over which it has no direct authority. It's a non-hierarchical arrangement. And so how you proceed and your awareness of being a polycentric operator is really critical to help you succeed in this environment. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about the ROADS process. But I just want to give you a few ideas of what I'll share with you in the rest of this talk. First, I'd like to talk about a little bit more about what the ROADS process is and why SAON saw the need for creating it. I'd like to talk about where there's shared interest between SAON ROADS and the UN Decade for Ocean Science. And then if the next bullet clicks, there it is, I'll talk about the types of organizational arrangements and planning approaches that I think would best support our shared progress. So the purpose of SAON ROADS, for one moment. So we all understand that the changes in the Arctic are moving at a pace, they exist at a scope and extent that's really unprecedented. And that we also know that observations are going to inform our actions in the face of these unprecedented changes. The images off to the right just, touch upon the many things that we need observing systems to help us manage well. And, oops, my bullets aren't, there it goes. We also know that systemic issues, those related to planning, partnership engagement, deployments, infrastructure, are impeding our progress. And SAON was really created to address the systemic issues related to planning and partnership engagement. And I would say the challenge SAON was created to address was planning diffusion, which arises when these many centers of action ignore polycentricism and plan independently of one another. So SAON ROADS was envisioned as a tool and a process to overcome this diffusion. So SAON impaneled a task force a number of years ago and asked the task force to speak to the kinds of planning tools that SAON's roadmap would need to consider, or the kinds of issues that its roadmap would need to consider. So the first recommendation of the road mapping task force was to recognize that Indigenous peoples in the Arctic need to be equitably engaged in the roads process from the very beginning. We also understand that all aspects of the roads process should support broadly shared benefit. Again, getting back to this recognition of polycentricism and non-hierarchical arrangements, people engage because there's benefit to what they're trying to accomplish, and recognizing where those benefits intersect is critical to making progress. It was also, again, recognized that many of these actors have their own planning tools, their own planning responsibilities that they need to fulfill. So roads is really meant to complement and integrate the planning processes that are already in place at sort of a meta level. It's kind of a planning integrator. And last, it was recognized that roads should support stepwise development so that different actors can step into the process when they're ready, and that we can have a grassroots identification of foci. So I'll just touch on a key tool that reflects some of these ideas in the planning principles, and that tool is called Shared Arctic Variables. So shared Arctic variables cue off of the planning strengths of the essential variables of the global networks. What do those essential variables do? Those essential variables for ocean or climate or biodiversity, they parse the greater problem into phenomena around which communities of practice can be assembled to work in a more focused way, but in parallel with others on developing observing requirements and implementation strategies. So sea ice is one of these big buckets. Benthic abundance is one of these big buckets. And what we recognized in the roads process is that the essential variables of the global networks needed to think about how they could be better extended into regional concerns and better reflect the needs of Indigenous peoples. And so the shared Arctic variables concept looks like the union of regionally identified science and decision-making needs, Indigenous identified benefits and foci, as well as implementation strategies, and the essential variables previously mentioned of the global network. And at the union of these three kind of bigger centers of action, we describe what we'd like to identify in our planning process as shared Arctic variables. For more on shared Arctic variables, I would point you to a paper by Alice Bradley et al. From in the upcoming special issue of the Arctic Journal. So now turning to where there's this intersection of shared interest between the UN Decade Process and SAON. On the left, I've listed specific actions from the Arctic Action Plan and challenges at the global level that I see as highest relevance to SAON and the roads process. And on the right-hand side, some of the ways in which current SAON roads activities might be moving forward it could be moving forward in synchronicity with these actions. Access to data and information, observing the state and trends of Arctic environments, expanding the global ocean observing system, relate to things like the roads process, like the way that SAON is already serving as a liaison to the Goose Regional Alliance and could potentially make supportive actions towards building a specific Arctic Regional Alliance for the Global Ocean Observing System, and many activities under SAON's Arctic Data Committee. Sorry, my slides are a little pokey here. Oops. So just a couple brief summary points for you to think about during your deliberations today. We need to recognize polycentricism in how we proceed. In particular, I think it's super relevant at this intersection between SAON and the UN Decade Process. I think we need to look at how our policy mandates feed into our authorities to collaborate, because that really helps us get things done. And the UN Decade Process is a huge opportunity to find those authorities to collaborate. I think we need to think about how our soft policy bodies, like the Data Committee, like the Observing Summit, can help keep these dialogues alive. But more specifically, I think we need to look at a more kind of concrete center of action for Arctic UN decade actions. And I think from the standpoint of SAON and the Rhodes process, this is how we'd really maximize our contribution. So with that, I'd like to recognize the co-authors on the Rhodes manuscript, point you to where you can find more information, and thank you for your time.